Welcome to Devine Intervention, shedding light on Illinois property tax.
Hello and welcome to Devine Intervention, shedding light on Illinois property tax with Nora Devine. Nora has been a property tax attorney in private practice since 2005. She has developed a statewide practice in all jurisdictions in Illinois and represents all property classes. I'm Kevin Rosenquist, and today we're going to talk about tax increment financing, or TIF. We'll look at what a TIF district actually is, why cities use them, how they're funded, and who really benefits when one is created. Nora, welcome back.
Thank you so much.
Well, let's just start at the beginning. Could you explain exactly what a tax increment financing district is?
Sure. Sometimes it's misleading to even call it a district at all, because sometimes a TIF can just cover one single property. But many times we do see a tax increment financing district covering either a downtown area of a town that has kind of seen better days, and they're trying to revitalize a certain portion of the town. Usually it's the downtown area. In our state, which is Illinois, we have a lot of river towns. Just because of just how our state's history developed and everything like that. We've got places like Rockford, and we've got Joliet, and we've got Elgin, and we've got Aurora, and all these towns that are river towns. That they were not really suburbs back then. They were exurbs. They were their own, dynamic towns that had, very varied industries operating in them. And so they kind of cropped up along these rivers, and there was a vibrant downtown area. And when a lot of the manufacturing and other types of industries sort of relocated to foreign countries, these cities really had downtrodden central business districts that used to be vibrant. So we've seen TIF districts sometimes enacted to try to address and try to get some activity restarted in those areas. So a TIF is, when it's used correctly, it's used by municipalities to light a spark or light a flame under an area that they want to see either revitalized or active when it wasn't before. So the way it works is essentially you look at the values that are in place, the property values and the property taxes that are being paid on those values. And then you freeze at that point those property taxes and those property values, and then you allow the development to occur. So development usually means that they're going to tear something down, they're going to tear something up, they're going to dig new foundations, they're going to put in new infrastructure. So we're talking about roads and streetlights and sewers and all the things that go along with any kind of project that has to do with real estate. Then they're going to build these buildings, and then they're going to hopefully make these buildings useful in the marketplace, which will draw occupants, whether it's residential occupants or commercial occupants or industrial occupants. And with that occupancy, it's going to be activity that wasn't there before. Mm-hmm. And there's going to then be property value that's flowing from having this there, even though it wasn't there before. So here's where it gets controversial. So even though all this, it's on the way up, there's this slope and the value is like on an upward trajectory, but the amount of money that's being paid to the school district and the taxing district is going to stay at a level like this. So if the tax bill was $100 before the development, and now the tax bill is $1,000, let me say that again. So if the tax bill at the conception of the TIF was $100, and then after the development occurs, the tax bill is now $1,000, the $100 is going to be flowing to the taxing districts and split up among the school district, the municipality, the county, the park district, the forestry district, the highway and roads district, whatever districts you have on the tax bill for that location. So they're still splitting up the same old $100. And then that extra $900 in value is not flowing to the taxing districts. Instead, it's flowing to repay the bonds that may have been issued in order to finance the construction. And back in the day, these TIFs were really for infrastructure. They were for, putting in the roads, putting in the sewers, putting in the lighting, putting in, all that stuff. And then over time, these TIFs have now been used to finance the buildings themselves, and the public doesn't get to own the buildings at the end of the TIF. the developer owns the buildings. So that's where these get a little bit more controversial at this point, because we're using tax increment financing to enrich a private investor is really what's happening in a lot of places.
So something started out with good intentions and then went sideways. What a crazy concept, especially in Illinois, right?
It's still good in
Yeah.
terms of a concept, because once the end of the TIF period occurs, these are supposed to last for 20 years. But of course, in Illinois, we've seen many of them extended. We have about 1,400 plus of these TIF districts in the state of Illinois right now, and they are routinely extended. You have to go to the legislature to get them extended, but I think they could go up to 28 years, maybe longer. I'm not sure. But at the end of the tax increment financing period of time, 100% of that tax bill then will be divvied up among the taxing districts, such as the school districts. So although they have to go for 20 years with that same old $100 tax bill, and they can't access that extra $900 of tax that's being generated by the new development, at the end of the 20-year period, ideally, then that additional value will then be captured and distributed among the taxing districts. So that's why they do it, because they're creating tax base where there wasn't any. And that is what people want to do. That is good government to try to do that. It's just a matter of, are we front loading the financing of the infrastructure, or are we just straight up using this mechanism to finance new buildings for private investors? So that's the question. Yeah. And the other questions that people have about this is, are these areas really blighted? We're seeing a lot of tax increment finance zones that being blighted is one of the requirements under the statute, that it's supposed to be a tool that's used in a blighted area. And now they're not being used for anything that anyone could really with a straight face call blighted. They just put a tax increment financing zone on Old Orchard Mall, which is one of the most successful malls in the region. And it's not a property tax TIF, it's more of a sales tax TIF. But so now if you go buy a new iPhone for $1,500, if you buy it in Chicago, you pay a certain tax rate. If you buy it at Old Orchard, you pay an extra percent, because there is an extra percentage being paid on all purchases at Old Orchard. And that money is going into a TIF fund, and the money is becoming the property basically of the developer, because the developer has put a lot of money into improving Old Orchard. But they wanted to have this public-private partnership where, yes, they had skin in the game, but they wanted the community to have skin in the game and to finance some of those improvements as well, because it would be increasing the amount of sales tax that the community could realize long term.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a decade away from being in Chicago, living in Chicago, but I remember Old Orchard, and it was not
blighted.
Blighted. That's not the word I would ever use.
It's not the poster child for a blighted property by any stretch.
Right. I remember too. Rockford. You brought up Rockford, and I do remember that did cut, like the downtown really got built up, and it was much better over time from when I was a kid to like right before I left. Is that an example of TIFs working?
There are some really successful projects in Rockford. There was an Embassy Suites that turned out really, really well. There's like an adaptive reuse of a like old industrial building. They turned it into an Embassy Suites, and it was so nice. I went there for a conference for the Illinois Property Assessment Institute. I would like, if they had a spa on the second floor or something, like I would just like come spend a weekend here. I really enjoyed it. It was really actually very nice. Yes, I'm sure there's tons of examples of it doing the right thing, but is the downtown central business district of Chicago blighted? I mean, I guess it depends on who you ask. I don't think so. I mean, I think you've got enormous amounts of property value down there, but a lot of it is in a TIF zone. And it's adjacent to this other TIF zone, which is called McPier, and that covers, as you might guess, McCormick Place and Navy Pier. And so, is that blighted?
Not last time I was down that way, I'll tell you that much. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then there is, which you probably, will get to asking me about this later, but, basically like if there's a surplus in one TIF, you can port the surplus over to an adjacent TIF that's right next door. And so if you make your TIF a crazy shape that it's like technically touching like every other TIF district in the region, then it gives you a lot more flexibility on like where you can port the extra money to. And that's part of the thing that frustrates the public and part of the thing that the press writes about quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So who decides when and where a TIF district is created?
It's the municipality. They're the ones that want it. And in Illinois, it's basically if you have a, majority vote of the, aldermen in the city of Chicago or the village trustees in some other municipality, you can get a TIF put in place. It's not the case in other states, as you can imagine. Like it's well known that in other states, there are taxing bodies that have veto power over whether a TIF should come into existence or not. And so you see the number of TIFs that exist is much, much lower in those states where, say, the school district could unilaterally object to the existence or creation of a TIF.
Okay. Interesting. Obviously, you've talked about how TIFs can have benefits and drawbacks. Are there other tensions that it creates with taxpayers aside from what you were talking about as far as the funding private companies?
People that have the biggest complaints are the school boards, that they're saying like, okay, but look at all this new property value and we're not able to access it. And so it results in their budget and their levy is then being distributed among all these other taxpayers who are not in the TIF. And it creates a situation where the tax rate is increasing in order so that levy can get paid to the taxing district. But the tax rate wouldn't be increasing as much if they were able to extend the tax rate to that value that is contained in the TIF district. So school boards don't love these. They don't love them, and then they can be extended well beyond what they were anticipated to do.
Are there transparency requirements for how these are spent? Can the public find out where the money is going if they try?
Yes. There is a requirement under the statute that they file a report with the Illinois comptroller. And from what I understand, that reporting does happen and it is accurate and it is knowable. The Cook County government is not known for, ethics and transparency exactly, I would say, but one of the bright spots that they have going for them is actually their clerk's office has been one of the best in the state at showing the public what is going on with the TIF funds. So they have a tool on the website where you can go and look up any TIF and see exactly the money that has come in and the money that's gone out and the plan that was in place and whether or not it's actually measuring up to the plan that was in place.
You mentioned earlier about being able to move TIF money to, extra money from one TIF region or district to another. What would be the reason for people doing that?
Yeah, you'd have to ask the politicians, but it's basically they, if they want to shore something up over here, they can take the money from over there. So sometimes these TIF surpluses can be a bit of a slush fund. And this last time we had a huge budget hole for the Chicago public schools, and the mayor floated a real estate tax increase, meaning increasing the amount of money that was a part of the levy. So Chicago's home rule, and so therefore they're not subject to the property tax extension limitation law. And by a majority vote of the aldermen, they can agree to add on, say, another $500,000 onto the levy. And the levy is the amount of money that they're requesting from the property tax. And when that happens, that additional amount of money that they're requesting is then distributed among all the taxpayers in the county. Well, there were enough aldermen who said they weren't going to vote for a budget that relied on a property tax increase, that instead what this mayor has done this year is has authorized, sort of covering the deficit in the school budget with like $500 million that's in the TIF fund. And so there's a lot of questions about, shouldn't we be cutting expenses, and like, why are we still giving healthcare to non-citizens? And so people are starting to ask those hard questions where it's like, well, maybe it's not a question of getting more money. Maybe it's a question of spending less money.
And obviously there's been other examples of that before. Famously, the tollways in Illinois were supposed to be temporary. And I remember hearing a long time ago about how they started taking money from the tolls to pay for other things. Then they relied on that toll money, so the tolls never went away. it kind of like similar to what happened with Social Security, I think, right? Where they started pulling so much money from it that they ended up screwing it
And in
over.
Illinois, the biggest part of our financial problems are about pension holidays, meaning
Pensions, yeah.
we needed to pay a certain amount in order to stay on track with the obligations we were going to have in terms of paying pensions out to retired government workers. And they took vacations from paying those monies. And, you know, I thought that everybody was on board with the idea that we just can't do that anymore. But indeed, that's in the headlines again, that this municipal administration is using that as a way to cover the deficit, and the hole in the budget is to suggest maybe we don't contribute everything that we should this year to the pension obligations, which is terrifying. It just means that we just haven't learned anything.
No, that's for sure. That's for sure. You know, do you have ideas on what reforms or safeguards could make the system better?
I think if we went back to just doing it for truly blighted areas, it would be better. I think it's being overused as a tool, and it's creating funding errors and problems with how we're funding our school. So I think if we want to fund the school, we have to have the school be able to have the tax rate apply to all the property value in the county as much as possible. And then if it's going to be a TIF project, it has to be, I think, something really specific. And I think it really needs to be for something that's actually blighted.
If a property owner is listening and wants to know whether their property is inside a TIF district or how that might impact them, where can they go to get information?
Really easy. Inside of Cook County, you would look at your second property tax bill. So your second installment bill will have a breakdown of every single line item on your tax bill. And right on there, it'll say this amount of money is being paid into the TIF district. Outside of Cook County, any tax bill that you pull up is going to show whether or not there's a line item there that shows that money from your tax bill is being paid into a tax increment financing district.
Okay. All right. Well, that's great information, Nora. Really interesting stuff, and it'd be interesting to see if any of those changes are made. That's it for today's episode of Devine Intervention, shedding light on Illinois property tax. If you've ever wondered how TIF districts affect your neighborhood or your tax bill, Nora and her team at the Devine Law Group can help you understand the local policies shaping property values across Illinois. Visit thedevinelawgroup.com to learn more, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Leave us a review wherever you listen. We really appreciate it. Nora, great stuff. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. See you soon.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.